Okay, so Homestretch, the art of finishing well. We're looking at the first three chapters, and just a quick summary to get us going in case we didn't get through all of them. In chapter 1, Reverend Tom is talking about stretching homeward towards our original source, and he gives a couple of ways that that's happening. He talks about the one of the old sayings, from dirt to dirt, ashes to ashes, and dust to dust, and we're stretching homeward from the dust that we came from, back to the dust that we're going towards. And I like to think of that we're human beings, but we're made of stardust. And he talks about his aspirations at the time, and I took some notes about Reverend Tom. Currently, right now, Reverend Tom is 81 years old. Reverend Tom was born in 1941. In ways of background, he's had 54 years, 54 years as an ordained UU minister, which he started that journey in 1967. And he's the author of over 24 books, one of which is the one we're looking at, but he's written 24 books on personal growth, social compassion, and spiritual growth. And he was, I believe, 67 years old. He's 81 now, but he was 67 years old when he wrote this book. And he had just retired from full-time parish ministry. And he said one of his aspirations was to go back to where his career began, because his career began, he said, working with the elder population, and he wanted to enter those places now anew, neither as a pastor nor as a family member, but just as a part of the human kin, that human bond and relationship. And he wanted to return to the primal source of his call to ministry. And that was one of the things that he was interested in and called to do at the time of his look forward into his home stretch. And then it was about the title itself. Every title is intentional, but he said the term homestretch is intentional. Homestretch refers to that period of time left on the human clock, sometimes sizable, sometimes brief, before we re-enter ground, dust unto dust. But there's more to the matter of stretching, and he starts to talk about stretching and the importance of that inclusion there, because in stretching, you're both your body and your mind. If they're not moved and they're not stretching, they will languish and wither away. And then he also talks about, in that first chapter, how he's going to deliver and how the rest of the book is structured. And what he says is that he selected a blend of sagas that are illustrated of real home stretchers. While they aren't all uniformly rosy, they do underscore his bedrock conviction of chastened hopefulness. And so one of the ideas that many might have going into the idea of the home stretch and the topic of this book is that it's a heavy topic, that it's something that is uncomfortable, or something that's just that, uncomfortable. But what Reverend Tom is saying, that there's hopefulness in this journey, and even in the illustrations that he has to share that are not rosy, that come in chapters 2 and 3, and will come, I'm sure, later in the book as we get through there. There's hope in all of them, because without hope there is nothing else. So we have to keep hope alive. And then so he moves into chapter 2 after giving us those pieces of insight into why he did it, and how intentional the title was, meaningful. There's also, if you do go into it, there's some wonderful quotations that he gives and that he cites throughout the book that are one, there's several visits with, I like the term he uses, the Nazarene, which is Jesus. And in chapter, I can't remember if it's chapter 2 or 3, and I didn't put the exact delineation, but he talks about the story of Elijah. And Elijah is a really great illustration of what can happen and what does happen, because all of us are on kind of a repeat of the same journey. And what happened to Elijah and what happens to so many of us is we have something huge, something big, something grand, whether it's a goal or a moment. And that moment happens, and that moment is glorious. And in the case of Elijah, it was a victory. It was a military victory, and there were celebrations and there were parades, and the celebrations and the parades ended, and time went on, and the distance between the celebrations and the parades became even longer. And in the concept of what Reverend Tom has been sharing with us about stretching, he was failing to stretch himself. He failed to have any other purpose and was longing for that big blast of energy, and thus he became weary and he started wandering, and he wandered off, and so many of us experience those same types of experiences where we end up in a wandering position and get lost. And then finally in chapter 3, he starts talking about the Sabbath, slow poking around, and the imagery that I try to invite into our consciousness in our meditation space was that of a slow and leisurely walk in the wood. And he talks about the invitation that he accepted of Thoreau, and how Thoreau spent many times in the woods, often alone, and he attributed to Henry David Thoreau the quotation that he would rather give up his money than his afternoon, which was his walks in the wood. And then Reverend Tom also points out that it's a gift, the ability to slow down, not be chasing any goals, not be rearing the children and pushing the business along, or pushing the program along, or pushing the idea up the hill, is that respite, that time is actually a gift. And if it's taken as a gift, it can be seen as such, and can be invited into so many spaces in the journey. And then he points out another illustration and goes back to the Nazarene and to Jesus, and he points out that so many times in the stories that are recounted in the Christian Bible, whenever Jesus encounters especially the masses, he always takes a respite right away and goes away. And they say he goes away and he prays and he meditates, and often and for long periods of solitude and alone. So the Sabbath was that third chapter, the invitation to breathe, the invitation and the conversation about how that breath is both ancient and universal across the entire earth, and it connects all of us, and it's a requirement that we have to have on an intermittent basis throughout the whole day. So with that, I'm going to look to the congregation, and in chapter 1, 2, or 3, was there anything in the journey that came to you, and is that you can share with us? And Anna, I'm gonna mute the desktop, and I'm gonna ask you if you will unmute the laptop for us again, and we'll see if we can capture the sound and see if there's anybody in the congregation that has something to add to the discussion. There we go. Can you give us a 1, 2, 3 test, Anna? Okay, I think we can hear you. So
1, 2, 3.
Yes, excellent. So there in the fellowship, is there anybody that in engaging the concept of the distance between now and the end, when we return to dust, what does that bring up for you? Is there something that you can share in your own journey and your own thought this morning about what it means to engage here to there. Anyone?
Yellow.
Oh,
It's too much echo.
let's see. How can you make sure that the sound is muted on the laptop? Not sound is not muted. Is turned down so that the sound isn't coming out of the laptop. It's turned down all the way. That should hopefully remove the echo.
Use the microphone.
Well, that'll work too, Carol. But I think we just heard you fine when you just said you could use the microphone. Right now, the desktop microphone is muted, and now we have the laptop unmuted. There we go.
1, 2, 3.
We got you.
Okay. I was just. Yeah, it's not working.
Can you turn the volume down just a little bit from the computer mic there, Paul? Paul, can you turn the?
Hello?
We got you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Better. I'll make it short and sweet. I was just thinking this week about how going into another decade before I know it, and that how I want to stay involved with me teaching and the kids and teaching music and of course sports like playing golf, how that is going to keep me, hopefully with my health being good, propel me into the to the later years, which I hope last at least another 20, but who knows. Anyway, so I'm just grateful because I do have the kids to teach, and even the adults that I teach. It's fun. It makes life worth getting up, and having something to do. And animals also. My animals always help keep me going, and my grandson. So I feel grateful for all those things that I have.
Anybody else in the fellowship have something they'd like to share? Well, I'll share that just in the service today, when Candy was talking about her mom being 102 and then sharing that she's been in the facility that she's lived in up in the Los Angeles area for 18 years, it made me think in the book where he talks about the lady who found herself in a wheelchair, and one of the things like how Carol just shared that she wants to play golf and she has some other things that she wants to do to stay active to keep the stretch in her body. This lady started developing and teaching choreographed dances that could be done from a wheelchair as part of her why and her redefinition of what those years were going to be about, embracing the circumstance. And then he told another story of an individual who withered away because they couldn't find anything to hold on to. And so it's the stagnation versus being generative and being alive and stretching. And so I'll shoot to Zoom and ask those on Zoom, is there anyone on Zoom that had a thought to share about the period of the home stretch and these themes that Reverend Tom are inviting us into in these first 3 chapters? I don't see any takers. I don't see any takers. Oh, I'm sorry. I see Rachel's hand.
Yes, hi. Oops, I just dropped a bunch of things. I just want to say what an amazing group we have here. One previous member is studying now. I think she's in her late 60s and she's becoming a paralegal. We have another member who in her late 60s learned to read and write Russian, and I'm pretty sure as well as speak it. Brian and I also, in our later decades, we just got back from Thailand, and Brian's fluent in Thai, and now I've got children's books for me to learn to write Thai. But these people are just inspirational, as is this book. And thank you, Don, for bringing the book. And it's just, I think we're a remarkable group, and it's so good to see Jean and Carolyn and people, you know, we move ahead with our life, and Oakley taking on the role of a president of UUFLB. And, you know, I mean, we're just a really phenomenal group, and Candy, who still organizes music groups. I mean, a lot of inspiration here with us in UUFLB. So I just want to say I'm really happy to be back and be here.
Thank you so much, Rachel. And I echo what you're saying and what your thought is, because the activity and the long-standing relationships that existed through Jean Rohn and Jean and Jack Paris, and the individuals that would get together on a weekly basis to explore subjects, and they would watch a series of courses every week, have coffee, and discuss in community. And that's what I was invited into 5 years ago. And it was, for me, you know, right now I'm 49 years old, reaching to be 50 in February. And the thought that I too can be like Jean Rohn in my mid 90s, and like Candy's mom 102, and have some thought into what does that look like. So when Reverend Tom talks about there's an invitation to go into oneself and to find some peace, and to not be so caught up on all of the other things that are required in the journey that we call life. Even for me, as I'm pulling up on 50 and still very deeply entrenched, and see a light at the end of the tunnel that is the thing, retirement, the invitation to have a little bit of pause, that thought of Sabbath, and just like the breath, there has to be an in and out and a pause in between each of those. All the things that I'm working on building and working on achieving is exampled through the things that Rachel just pointed out, the things I just shared, and all of the examples that are being shown in community. And it's almost as though we're blowing in the wind, and it's a storm, and we're together, and we're together because everybody has been holding on and grabbing to one another. So I'll go and seek to get some more discussion going, and we're going to go into chapter 2. And hold on one second, let me find my spot. And he talks about let your steps be guided by such light as you have, right? And that's about accepting the journey and the place that you come from, because I often think about he says you basically have to run your race, and you can't, and I go to track when I think about running a race, and you can't run in anybody else's lane. And one of the reasons that you can't do that is, from using myself as an example, whoever's in that lane, if we're talking about a life journey and a comparison of what they have and what I have, If they weren't born in Philadelphia and they didn't grow up in Alabama and then spend their summers in Philadelphia and then go into the military and then go to college and get educated in Florida and then come out and meet a community many years later in California, there's nothing about their life experience that's anything in any way that compares to mine. And then there's another 150 different layers of uniqueness just in a couple of quick recounts and characteristics that I could give that makes my journey so unique. So in trying to be prepared for this, I listened to a podcast from a MD who was a MD who's 104 years old, and she practiced as a doctor until she was 86. And the question in the podcast that was presented to this MD were the six things that she thought were the secrets of living a good life. And I wanted to see what she had to say and how that compared to the home stretch. And one of the things that I took away from her six things, the big one is that you had to have an important purpose of something that was important to you. And Reverend Tom alludes to it in Homestretch, and it's what I'm seeking to embody myself more and more every day in all aspects of what I do, and that's just to be of service. And so my purpose is always looking for ways to take what I know I can do and to employ it in a way to be of service. And so I turn that around to all of you and reflecting on yourselves and your journeys. When you think of what it is that you would say is your why or your purpose, what is it that you could share with us about your journey and your thought with this home stretch as we move to back to Stardust? Any thoughts on Zoom? You're muted right now, Carolyn, but we're coming to you.
Yeah, I just was gone for a brief time because my kids brought my grandpuppies over because I'm the chief babysitter and bottle watcher for my grandpuppies, and they're going to be here until Tuesday. And so I think probably that's what I do quite mostly to help my family. Well, yes, hello, Scrappy. And, and it brings great joy to my life. Thank you. Oh my goodness, you want to come up here?
Thank you, Carolyn. Anybody else on Zoom have a why or a direction, a purpose that they can share with us? Well, let's expand it over to the building. Anybody in the building have a why or a purpose that they share as something that helps them as they're moving in the home stretch? I see no takers. I see no takers. Well, I will say that what Reverend Tom implores us to do is that we have to find something that allows us to continue to stay flexible and mobile and moving, and at the same time to be much more deliberate in how we allocate our time and in focusing our time towards finding moments and opportunities to take those peaceful and mindful moments alone, whether they be breathing, painting, cooking, walking, however it is that you're able to find those times and those moments. So we're going to figure out how to make the conversation more interactive. We should have Pam and Dara back from their vacation respite themselves next week. So thank you for working with us as we went through this first installment of our Summer Up program. We have next week we're going to do chapters 4 and chapter 5. And I'll share the screen so you guys can see what we have coming up. Next week, we're going to do chapter 4 and chapter 5. On August 6th, we're going to do chapter 6 and chapter 7. And then on August 18th, Isaac Castro, a recent graduate of Starr King. He was a classmate of mine in the spring. He was a featured graduate in a short film that Starr King produced that was shown at General Conference, and he's going to be joining us on 8/13. And then we're going to close out the book and the review of Homestretch in our unique programming series on August 20th. So hopefully we will be able to get everybody back, and with a little more practice, we'll have a better ability to interact. And now we're going to